Welcome to Poirot's Mysteries, exploring the brilliance of Hercule Poirot's detective work. In the shadowed halls of Ravenwood Hall, a scream pierces the night, and Edward Harwood vanishes, leaving only a cryptic note and a blood-stained clue. Was it a lover's betrayal, a desperate escape, or something far darker? As secrets unravel and lies collide, only one man can pierce the veil of deception: Hercule Poirot, the master detective whose little grey cells will uncover a truth more shocking than anyone could imagine. Who is hiding the deadly secret, and what price will be paid before the final twist is revealed? Chapter 1. The Gathering at Ravenwood Hall. The late summer sun cast a golden sheen over the rolling lawns of Ravenwood Hall, a sprawling Georgian estate nestled in the heart of the Devon countryside. Its ivy-clad walls and towering chimneys stood as a testament to centuries of grandeur, yet beneath the serene facade, a quiet unease simmered. The occasion was a weekend gathering, ostensibly to celebrate the engagement of Miss Cecilia Langley to Mr. Edward Harwood, but the air was thick with unspoken tensions, as though the very stones of the house held secrets they dared not whisper. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal friend and chronicler of Hercule Poirot's exploits, had arrived at Ravenwood Hall at the behest of Lady Margaret Langley, Cecilia's formidable mother. The invitation had been vague, hinting only at a matter of some delicacy that required discretion. Hastings, though accustomed to Poirot's penchant for unravelling mysteries, felt a twinge of curiosity tinged with apprehension as he stepped from the motor car onto the gravel drive. The estate was magnificent, yet its isolation, miles from the nearest village, lent it an air of confinement, as if the world beyond its gates ceased to exist. The guests had gathered in the grand drawing-room, a cavernous space adorned with portraits of stern-faced Langleys glaring down from gilded frames. Lady Margaret, a woman of impeccable posture and steely eyes, presided over the assembly with the air of a queen. Her daughter, Cecilia, was a vision of youthful beauty, her auburn curls catching the light as she laughed nervously at something Edward Harwood whispered. Edward, a handsome man in his early 30s with a charming smile, seemed at ease, though his eyes darted occasionally toward the other guests, as if gauging their reactions. Among the company were Dr. Lionel Grayson, the family physician, whose quiet demeanour belied a sharp intelligence; Mrs. Beatrice Travers, a widowed cousin of Lady Margaret, whose penchant for gossip was matched only by her love of sherry; and Mr. Reginald Carver, a solicitor and old friend of the Langley family, whose pinched expression suggested he carried a burden heavier than his briefcase. Rounding out the party was Miss Evelyn Ward, Cecilia's childhood friend, whose reserved manner and watchful eyes hinted at a deeper knowledge of observed the interactions with growing interest. The conversation, though polite, was laced with undercurrents of strain. Lady Margaret's inquiries about Edward's business ventures in London carried a faint edge of scepticism, while Beatrice Travers's pointed remarks about Cecilia's hasty engagement drew tight smiles from the couple. Even Dr. Grayson, usually reticent, seemed unusually attentive, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the arm of his chair. As the clock on the mantelpiece chimed 7, the butler, Mr. Jenkins, a man of impeccable decorum, announced dinner. The party moved to the dining room, where a table gleamed with silver and crystal beneath a chandelier that cast prismatic light across the walls. The meal was exquisite: roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a delicate consommé, but the atmosphere grew heavier with each course. Hastings noted how Cecilia's laughter faltered when Edward spoke of their future plans, and how Reginald Carver's fork paused mid-air at the mention of the Langley estate's financial state. It was during the dessert course, as Jenkins served a raspberry tart, that the first crack in the evening's civility appeared. Beatrice Travers, her cheeks flushed from sherry, leaned forward and said,
"Cecilia, my dear, I do hope you've considered the implications of marrying so quickly. The Langley fortune, after all, is not what it once was."
A hush fell over the table. Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed, and Edward's smile froze. Cecilia, her face paling, set down her spoon.
"Aunt Beatrice,"
she said, her voice trembling.
"I assure you, Edward and I are quite content with our plans." "Content?"
Beatrice replied, her tone arch.
"My dear, contentment is a luxury when one's inheritance is at stake."
Before Cecilia could respond, Reginald Carver cleared his throat. "Perhaps we might discuss less delicate matters," he said, though his own voice carried a note of unease. "The weather, for instance, has been uncommonly fine." The conversation limped on, but the damage was done. Hastings, ever attuned to the subtleties of human behaviour, sensed that Beatrice's comment had struck a nerve far deeper than mere social awkwardness. He made a mental note to mention it to Poirot, should the little Belgian detective make an appearance. For now, though, Poirot was absent, detained in London on another case, and Hastings felt the weight of observation fall squarely on his shoulders. As the meal concluded, the party retired to the drawing-room once more, where coffee and liqueurs were served. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across the room. Hastings, standing near a window that overlooked the darkened gardens, overheard a snatch of conversation between Evelyn Ward and Dr. Grave. Hastings turned away, pretending to admire a porcelain vase, but his mind raced. What did Evelyn mean? Was she referring to Cecilia's engagement? Or something more sinister? The evening wore on, punctuated by strained pleasantries and the occasional burst of laughter that felt forced. At 10:30, Lady Margaret rose, signalling the end of the evening. "We shall reconvene tomorrow," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "I trust you will all find your rooms comfortable." The guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the vast halls of Ravenwood. Hastings, assigned the room on the second floor, found himself restless. The house, for all its elegance, seemed to hum with secrets. He sat at a small writing desk, penning a letter to Poirot, though he knew it would not reach him before morning. "My dear Poirot," he wrote, "I find myself in a most curious situation. Ravenwood Hall is a place of beauty, but there is something amiss here, something I cannot yet name. I await your arrival with great anticipation." As he sealed the letter, a sound broke the silence. A sharp, unmistakable scream from somewhere within the house. Hastings leapt to his feet, his heart pounding. He flung open his door and hurried into the corridor, where other doors were opening and voices called out in alarm. Jenkins, the butler, appeared, his face pale but composed. "It came from Miss Cecilia's room," he said, already moving toward the east wing. Hastings followed, joined by Dr. Grayson and Reginald Carver. They reached Cecilia's door, which stood ajar. Inside, the room was in disarray. A chair overturned, a vase shattered on the floor. Cecilia stood in the center, her face ashen, clutching a piece of paper in her trembling hands. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Edward, he's gone." Dr. Grayson stepped forward, gently taking the paper from her. It was a note, hastily scrawled in black ink. "I cannot stay. Forgive me." The doctor's brow furrowed as he read it aloud, and a murmur of shock rippled through the small crowd now gathered at the door. Hastings, his mind racing, noted the time on the ormolu clock on Cecilia's mantelpiece. 10:47 p.m. Edward Harwood the charming fiancée, had vanished into the night, leaving behind a note that raised more questions than it answered. Was this a case of cold feet, or something far darker? Hastings felt a familiar thrill, the kind that always preceded one of Poirot's investigations. Whatever had happened at Ravenwood Hall, he was certain of one thing. The little grey cells of Hercule Poirot would soon be needed. Army. It is the little details that matter. Always it is the little details. And so, as the clock ticked toward midnight, the stage was set for a mystery that would test even the formidable intellect of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 2. The Vanishing of Edward Harwood. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Ravenwood Hall, casting long shadows across the polished floors, but it did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the household. The events of the previous night, the scream, the overturned chair, and Edward Harwood's abrupt disappearance hung over the estate like a storm cloud. The grand dining room, where breakfast was laid out with meticulous care, buzzed with whispers as the guests gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and suspicion. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at the far end of the table, sipped his coffee and observed the scene, his mind already piecing together the fragments of the mystery. Lady Margaret Langley presided over the meal with her usual composure, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Cecilia, pale and drawn, picked at her toast, her engagement ring glinting forlornly on her finger. Beside her, an empty chair marked Edward's absence, a silent accusation that no one dared address directly. Dr. Lionel Grayson, his medical bag at his side, spoke in low tones to Reginald Carver, whose pinched expression had deepened into something akin to dread. Beatrice Travers, undeterred by the tension, helped herself to a generous portion of kedgeree, her sharp eyes darting from face to face, as if cataloguing their reactions. Evelyn Ward, ever reserved, sat in silence, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the window. The butler, Jenkins, moved with his usual precision, but even he seemed affected by the atmosphere, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea. Hastings noted this, along with the curious fact that no one had yet mentioned the note Edward had left behind. It was as if the household had collectively agreed to avoid the subject, though the weight of it pressed upon them all. The silence was broken by Lady Margaret, who set down her cup with a deliberate clink. "I have sent for the police," she announced, her voice steady but cold. "They will arrive this morning to investigate Mr. Harwood's departure. In the meantime, I expect everyone to cooperate fully." A murmur rippled through the room. Beatrice Travers raised an eyebrow. "The police, Margaret? Surely this is a private matter. Edward has simply changed his mind, as young men are wont to do." Cecilia's head snapped up, her eyes flashing. "He did not change his mind," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Edward loved me. Something has happened to him. I know it." "Something, or someone," Evelyn Ward muttered, almost too quietly to be heard. Hastings caught the words, however, and filed them away. "Doesn't know what she's getting into," echoed in his mind, and he resolved to speak with her privately. Before the conversation could escalate, the door to the dining room opened and a maid announced the arrival of Inspector Grayson, no relation to the doctor, as he was quick to clarify. The inspector was a sturdy man in his 40s, with a no-nonsense air and a notebook already in hand. He surveyed the room with a practiced eye, his gaze lingering on Cecilia's pale face and the empty chair beside her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Inspector Grayson began, "I understand there has been a disturbance. A Mr. Edward Harwood has gone missing, and I am here to ascertain the facts. I will need to speak with each of you individually, starting with Miss Langley." Cecilia rose, her movements unsteady, and followed the inspector to the library, where he had set up a temporary base. The other guests exchanged glances, and Hastings sensed the undercurrents of fear and mistrust growing stronger. He excused himself and stepped into the hall, where he found Jenkins supervising the maids. The butler's composure had returned, but his eyes were wary. "Jenkins," Hastings said, keeping his tone casual. "You were the first to reach Miss Cecilia's room last night. Did you see anything unusual before the scream?" The butler hesitated, his hands clasping behind his back. "Nothing out of the ordinary, sir. I was in the servants' quarters when I heard the scream. I reached Miss Cecilia's room within moments." "And Mr. Harwood?" Hastings pressed. "Did you see him leave the house?" "No, sir," Jenkins replied, his voice firm. "His room was empty when I checked it after the alarm was raised. The window was open, but I saw no sign of him in the gardens." Hastings nodded, noting the open window as a potential clue. He thanked Jenkins and returned to the dining room, where the atmosphere had grown even more strained. Beatrice Travers was regaling Dr. Grayson with a theory about Edward's flighty nature, while Reginald Carver stared into his coffee, his fingers drumming nervously on the tablecloth. The morning passed in a series of interviews, with Inspector Grayson methodically questioning each guest. Hastings, waiting his turn, took the opportunity to explore the house. Ravenwood Hall was a labyrinth of corridors and hidden alcoves, its walls lined with tapestries and portraits that seemed to watch his every move. He found himself in the east wing, near Cecilia's room, and paused to examine the scene of the previous night's disturbance. The room was as it had been, chair overturned, vase shattered, the note now in the inspector's possession. Hastings crouched to inspect the floor, noting a faint scuff mark near the window. It was subtle, easily overlooked, but it suggested a struggle, or at least a hasty exit. He straightened, his mind racing. Edward's note had been brief, almost perfunctory, and the handwriting, though similar to samples Hastings had seen in Edward's room, seemed slightly off, as if written under duress. As he pondered this, a shadow fell across the doorway. Evelyn Ward stood there, her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "Captain Hastings," she said, her voice low. "You're observant? Have you found something?" "Perhaps," Hastings replied, cautious. "And you, Miss Ward? You seem to have reservations about this engagement." Evelyn's lips tightened. "Cecilia is my friend," she said. "I only want what's best for her. Edward, he was not what he seemed." Before Hastings could press further, a cry echoed from downstairs, a sharp, anguished wail that sent a chill through him. He and Evelyn hurried to the source, the drawing room, where they found Cecilia sobbing in Lady Margaret's arms. Inspector Grayson stood nearby, his face grim, holding a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. "It was found in the garden," the inspector said, his voice low, "beneath Mr. Harwood's window." He unfolded the handkerchief to reveal a silver cigarette case, engraved with Edward's initials. It was stained with a dark, ominous substance that could only be blood. Cecilia's sobs grew louder, and Lady Margaret's face hardened into a mask of resolve. Hastings felt a familiar stir of anticipation. This was no mere disappearance. Something far darker was at play. He excused himself and slipped away to the library, where he penned a second, more urgent letter to Poirot. "My dear friend, events at Ravenwood have taken a grave turn. A man is missing, and blood has been found. I implore you to come at once. Your little grey selves are needed more than ever." As he sealed the letter, the clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the silent house. Hastings glanced out the window, where the gardens stretched toward the horizon, their beauty marred by the shadow of suspicion. Edward Harwood was gone, and with him, the illusion of peace at Ravenwood Hall. The stage was set for Hercule Poirot, and Hastings could only hope his friend would arrive before the mystery deepened further, or before another tragedy struck. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Hercule Poirot. The afternoon sun hung low over Ravenwood Hall, bathing the estate in a warm, deceptive glow that did little to ease the tension gripping its inhabitants. The discovery of Edward Harwood's blood-stained cigarette case had cast a pall over the household, transforming polite unease into palpable dread. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the library window, watched as a sleek black motor car crunched along the gravel drive, its arrival heralding the one man capable of unravelling the mystery that had taken root in this isolated corner of Devon. Hercule Poirot. The car door opened, and out stepped the diminutive Belgian detective, his appearance as with an alertness that belied the long journey from London. Poirot adjusted his hat, surveyed the imposing facade of Ravenwood Hall, and gave a small nod, as if approving the stage for the drama to come. Hastings hurried to meet him, relief flooding his chest at the sight of his old friend. "Mon ami Hastings!" Poirot exclaimed, his voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "You summon me with such urgency, and yet you stand here looking as if the world has turned upside down. What is this affair at Ravenwood Hall?" Hastings, guiding Poirot into the entrance hall, recounted the events of the past 24 hours. Cecilia's scream, Edward's disappearance, the cryptic note, and the blood-stained cigarette case. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers stroking his moustache as he absorbed every detail. When Hastings finished, Poirot's eyes narrowed, and he murmured, "C'est intéressant. A disappearance, a note, and now blood. The little grey cells, they are already at work." They were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Grayson, who greeted Poirot with a mixture of respect and wariness. "Mr. Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "your reputation precedes you. I trust you'll find our methods adequate, though this case seems straightforward enough. A lover's quarrel, perhaps? Or a man fleeing his obligations?" Poirot's smile was polite but sharp. "Mon cher inspecteur, the straightforward is often the most deceptive. Permit me to examine the facts, and we shall see what lies beneath the surface." The inspector led them to the drawing room, where the guests had gathered once more, their faces a gallery of anxiety and suspicion. Lady Margaret stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, while Cecilia sat on a sofa, clutching a handkerchief, her eyes red from crying. Dr. Grayson, Reginald Carver, Beatrice Travers, and Evelyn Ward occupied various corners of the room, each avoiding the other's gazes. Jenkins, the butler, hovered near the door, his expression unreadable. Poirot's entrance caused a stir. Beatrice Travers let out a small gasp, murmuring, "The famous detective," while Reginald Carver's fingers tightened around his teacup. Cecilia looked up, hope flickering in her eyes, and Lady Margaret inclined her head in acknowledgement. Poirot, ever theatrical, removed his hat with a flourish and addressed the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and precise, "I am Hercule Poirot, and I have been called to assist in the matter of Mr. Edward Harwood's disappearance. I ask for your patience and your candor, for it is only through the truth, however small or inconvenient, that we shall find him." Uncomfortably, and Evelyn Ward's eyes darted towards Cecilia. Poirot continued, "I understand that a note was found, and the cigarette case stained with blood. These are the threads of our tapestry, but they are not the whole picture. I shall begin by examining the scene of the disappearance. Inspector, if you please." Inspector Grayson led Poirot and Hastings to Cecilia's room, where the signs of the previous night's chaos remained. The overturned chair had been righted, but the shattered vase still lay in pieces on the floor. The window through which Edward had presumably fled stood closed, its latch gleaming in the afternoon light. Poirot moved with the precision of a watchmaker, his eyes scanning every detail. He crouched to inspect the scuff mark Hastings had noticed, his gloved fingers tracing its outline. "Intéressant," he murmured. "A mark, yes, but not deep. A struggle, perhaps, but not a violent one. And the window." He opened it, leaning out to examine the sill. "No signs of forced entry, but the grass below is disturbed." Oui, someone left this way, but whether willingly or not, that is the question. He turned to the note, which Inspector Grayson had placed in a protective envelope. Poirot studied it through a small magnifying glass, his brow furrowing. The handwriting, he said. It is similar to Mr. Harwood's, as you have shown me, Hastings, but there is a tremor, a hesitation in the strokes. This was not written by a man at ease. Inspector Grayson frowned. You're suggesting he was coerced? I suggest nothing, mon ami. Poirot replied, his tone mild. I observe. And now I must speak with those who knew Mr. Harwood best. Miss Langley, if she is able, should be first. Cecilia was summoned, and she entered the room, her movements fragile, as if she might shatter like the vase at her feet. Poirot's demeanor softened, his voice gentle but probing. Mademoiselle, tell me of your last moments with Mr. Harwood. Every detail, no matter how small, is of consequence. Cecilia recounted the evening, her voice halting. She and Edward had retired to their rooms after dinner, planning to meet in the garden at 10:30 for a private moment. When he failed to appear, she grew anxious and returned to her room, where she found the note on her dressing table. I screamed, she admitted, because I couldn't believe he would leave me like that. And then the vase fell. I must have knocked it over in my shock. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. And this note, mademoiselle, was it in Mr. Harwood's usual hand? Cecilia hesitated, then shook her head. It looked like his, but it felt wrong. Too short. Thing, but it whispers another. We must learn what Mr. Harwood was to each person in this house. The rest of the afternoon was spent in interviews, with Poirot questioning each guest with his characteristic blend of charm and precision. Lady Margaret spoke of Edward as a suitable but unremarkable match, her tone suggesting she had tolerated rather than approved of him. Dr. Grayson revealed that Edward had consulted him about a minor ailment, a nervous stomach, indicating stress in the weeks leading up to the engagement. Beatrice Travers, predictably, painted Edward as a fortune hunter, though her evidence was mere gossip. Reginald Carver admitted to handling some of Edward's financial affairs, but his answers were vague, his discomfort palpable. Evelyn Ward, when pressed, repeated her cryptic warning about Edward's character, but refused to elaborate, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. As evening approached, Poirot and Hastings retired to the library, where the detective paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. Hastings, he said, this is a house of secrets. Each person here has a motive to wish Mr. Harwood gone. But the blood on the cigarette case, it complicates matters. Was it his blood? Was it a ruse? And why leave the case where it could be found? Hastings frowned. You think it was planted? I think nothing yet, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. But I observe that the stage is set, and the players are hiding their lines. Tomorrow we shall dig deeper into the alibis, the times, the little details that betray the truth. As the clock struck 6, a distant rumble of thunder echoed across the estate, signaling an approaching storm. Hastings glanced at Poirot, whose expression was one of quiet determination. The mystery of Edward Harwood's disappearance was only beginning, and Ravenwood Hall, with its secrets locked within its walls, was about to face the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The rain that had threatened Ravenwood Hall the previous evening arrived with a vengeance, lashing the windows with relentless fury as the morning unfolded. The storm seemed to mirror the turmoil within the house, where the mystery of Edward Harwood's disappearance deepened with every passing hour. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the weather, sat in the library, his notebook open on the polished mahogany table, his pen poised like a conductor's baton. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, watched his friend with a mixture of admiration and impatience, knowing that Poirot's methodical approach would soon unearth truths hidden beneath the surface of Ravenwood's polished civility. Poirot had requested that the household gather in the library after breakfast, a command delivered with such quiet authority that even Lady Margaret Langley, still pale but composed, sat near her mother, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Dr. Lionel Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. Beatrice Travers, her lips pursed, clutched a lace handkerchief as if it were a lifeline. Reginald Carver, the solicitor, sat rigidly, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window, while Evelyn Ward's gaze flickered between Poirot and the door, as if contemplating escape. Inspector Grayson stood by the fireplace, his notebook mirroring Poirot's, though his expression suggested he was less than pleased to share the investigation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the patter of rain. "We are here to discuss the disappearance of Mr. Edward Harwood, a matter most grave. I have examined the scene, the note, the cigarette case stained with blood, but it is in the minds of those present that the truth lies. I ask you to speak freely, for the smallest detail may be the key to unlocking this puzzle." He turned first to Cecilia, his green eyes softening. "Mademoiselle Langley, let us begin with you. You have told us of your plans to meet Mr. Harwood in the garden at 10:30, yet you found the note in your room shortly after. Can you recall the exact sequence of events?" Cecilia swallowed, her voice steady but faint. "I left the drawing room at 10 after we all retired. Edward and I had agreed to meet by the rose arbor. I waited there until nearly 10:30, but he didn't come. I thought perhaps he'd been delayed, so I returned to my room. That's when I saw the note on my dressing table. I screamed, and then the vase fell." Poirot nodded, his pen scratching a note. "And the time, mademoiselle? You are certain it was near 10:30 when you returned?" "Yes," Cecilia replied, hesitating. "The clock in the hall was striking as I passed. It was 10:30 exactly." "Merci," Poirot said, his gaze shifting to Jenkins, who stood near the door. "Monsieur Jenkins, you heard the scream and reached Miss Langley's room first. What time was this, and what did you see?" The butler straightened, his voice measured. "It was 10:47, sir, by the clock in Miss Cecilia's room. I was in the servants' quarters when I heard the scream. I ran to the east wing and found Miss Cecilia standing in the middle of her room, holding the note. The chair was overturned, the vase broken. I saw no one else." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And Mr. Harwood's room? You checked it immediately after?" "Yes, sir," Jenkins replied. "It was empty. The bed was undisturbed and the window was open, though the rain had not yet started." Poirot made another note at once. The interviews continued, each guest offering their account of the evening. Dr. Grayson claimed to have been in his room, reading a medical journal, and heard nothing until the scream. Beatrice Travers insisted she was in the drawing room, lingering over a glass of sherry, and saw no one pass through the hall. Reginald Carver, his voice strained, said he was in his study, reviewing documents, and heard only the scream. Evelyn Ward, her answers clipped, stated she was in her room, writing a letter, and had no knowledge of Edward's movements. Poirot listened with unwavering attention, his questions probing yet polite, designed to elicit details without arousing defensiveness. Hastings, watching closely, noted how Poirot's inquiries seemed to circle back to the timing of events and the precise locations of each person. The detective's insistence on these points was not lost on the inspector, who occasionally interjected with questions of his own, though they lacked Poirot's finesse. After the guests were dismissed, Poirot remained in the library, pacing slowly before the fireplace. Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, asked, "What do you make of it, Poirot? Their stories align, but there's something off, isn't there?" Poirot paused, his fingers steepled. "Mon ami, their stories align too well, like a chorus rehearsed. Yet there are cracks in the harmony. The timing, for instance, 10:30, 10:47, these are precise, yet no one saw Mr. Harwood leave, and the cigarette case found in the garden, stained with blood. Why was it left there? To tell us something, or to mislead us?" Hastings frowned. "You think someone planted it?" "I think," Poirot said, his voice low, "that someone wishes us to believe Mr. Harwood met with foul play. But whether he is the victim or the orchestrator, that is the question. We must examine the alibis more closely, and the relationships between these people. Motive, Hastings. Motive is the key." Poirot requested a map of the house, which Jenkins provided, a detailed floor plan showing the east wing, where Cecilia's and Edward's rooms were located, and the routes to the garden. Poirot studied it intently, his finger tracing the path from Edward's room to the rose arbor. "The garden," he murmured. "It is isolated, hidden by hedges, the perfect place for a rendezvous or an ambush." He then turned his attention to the cigarette case, which Inspector Grayson had placed in a locked box. Poirot examined it through the glass, noting the bloodstains and the engraved initials. "This blood," he said, "it must be tested. Is it human? Is it Mr. Harwood's? And why was the case left so conveniently where it could be found?" The inspector, growing impatient, said, "We've sent it to the laboratory in Exeter. Results will take a day or two. In the meantime, I'm inclined—" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps, Inspector, but a man who stages a disappearance does not leave blood behind unless he wishes to create a drama. And if it is a drama, we must ask, who is the audience?" As the afternoon wore on, Poirot continued his inquiries, speaking privately with each guest to probe deeper into their relationships with Edward. Cecilia revealed that Edward had seemed preoccupied in recent weeks, mentioning vague business troubles in London. Dr. Grayson admitted to prescribing a mild sedative for Edward's nerves, a detail he had not shared earlier. Beatrice Travers hinted at rumours of Edward's involvement in speculative investments, though she offered no proof. Reginald Carver, when pressed, confessed that Edward had recently inquired about the Langley estate's financial health, a question that had struck him as odd. Evelyn Ward remained evasive, repeating only that she distrusted Edward's intentions. By evening, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, and Poirot stood at the library window, gazing out at the sodden gardens. "Hastings," he said, "this house is like a puzzle box, each piece interlocking. Yet the picture is not yet clear. Tomorrow we shall examine the garden, the rose arbor, the paths, and we shall watch, mon ami, for the one who betrays themselves with a word, a glance, a gesture." As the clock chimed 7, a maid entered with a telegram for Poirot. He read it quickly, his expression unreadable, then tucked it into his pocket. "News from London," he said simply, but offered no further explanation. Hastings, sensing that Poirot was already several steps ahead, felt a familiar thrill. The little grey cells were at work, and the truth, however deeply buried, would not remain hidden for long. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The rain had ceased by morning, leaving Ravenwood Hall enveloped in a damp mist that clung to the windows and shrouded the gardens in an ethereal haze. The atmosphere within the house was no less oppressive, as the mystery of Edward Harwood's disappearance deepened, casting suspicion like a net over the gathered guests. Hercule Poirot, ever the picture of composure, stood in the entrance hall, his overcoat buttoned and his hat tilted at a precise angle, ready to inspect the grounds. Captain Arthur Hastings, at his side, felt the weight of the case pressing upon him, the blood-stained cigarette case and cryptic note looming large in his mind. Inspector Grayson had taken a particular interest in Cecilia Langley, whose emotional distress and position as Edward's fiancée made her, in his view, the most likely catalyst for the disappearance. "It's clear enough," the inspector declared over breakfast, his tone matter-of-fact. "Harwood got cold feet, staged a dramatic exit, and left that note to throw us off. Lovers' quarrels are messy, Mr. Poirot. I've seen it before." Poirot, sipping his tisane with deliberate calm, raised an eyebrow. "Mon cher, Inspector, you paint a picture most vivid, but it lacks nuance. A man does not leave blood behind for a mere quarrel. No, we must look beyond the obvious. The truth, it hides in the shadows of what seems certain." Hastings, catching the glint in Poirot's eye, knew his friend was already sifting through the layers of deception. The inspector's theory, while plausible, was precisely the kind of red herring Poirot delighted in dismantling. Determined to test it, Poirot announced his intention to examine the garden, particularly the rose arbor where Cecilia had waited for Edward. The guests, though not invited, watched from the windows as Poirot, Hastings, and the inspector ventured into the mist. The rose arbor was a secluded alcove, framed by thorny vines and sheltered by a high yew hedge. The ground, still soft from the rain, bore faint impressions of footprints, though they were muddled and indistinct. Poirot knelt, his gloved hands hovering over the earth, his eyes scanning for details. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing to a shallow indentation near the base of the arbor. "A footprint, yes, but partial. Someone stood here, perhaps waiting, perhaps watching, but the rain has erased much." The inspector, unimpressed, gestured toward the path leading back to the house. "The cigarette case was found there beneath Harwood's window. If he climbed out, he'd have come this way." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and followed the path to the spot beneath Edward's window. The grass was trampled, but the marks were chaotic, suggesting more than one person had passed through. Poirot examined the window itself, noting its height, low enough for a man to climb out with ease. "Intéressant," he murmured. "The window was open, yet no one heard the struggle. And this cigarette case, so conveniently placed. It is as if someone wishes us to follow this trail." Back in the house, Poirot requested a private audience with Beatrice Travers, whose penchant for gossip made her a potential source of unintended revelations. She entered the library with a flourish, her sherry glass replaced by a fan, which she flicked open with practiced drama. "Mr. Poirot," she said, settling into a chair, "I suppose you've heard the rumors about Edward Harwood, a charming man, but not entirely trustworthy." Poirot's smile was disarming. "Madame, I am most interested in these rumors. Tell me, what have you heard?" Beatrice leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They say he was in debt, Mr. Poirot. Investments gone wrong in London, speculative ventures, risky stocks. He needed money, and Cecilia's inheritance was a tempting prize. Why else would a man of his sort pursue a girl so quickly?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Wouldn't listen." Poirot made a note, his pen moving with precision. "Merci, Madame Travers. Your observations are most illuminating." As Beatrice left, Hastings whispered, "Do you believe her, Poirot? About the debts?" "I believe," Poirot replied, "that Madame Travers enjoys the role of storyteller. But there is a grain of truth in every tale. We shall verify this with Monsieur Carver, who knows of Mr. Harwood's finances." Reginald Carver was summoned next, his demeanor as tense as ever. When questioned about Edward's financial state, he hesitated, his fingers twisting a pen. "Edward did inquire about the Langley estate," he admitted. "He seemed anxious about its value. I told him it was substantial but tied up in trusts, not easily accessed. He didn't press further." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "And his own finances, monsieur? Were you aware of any difficulties?" Carver's eyes flickered. "I handled some of his investments. They were not as successful as he hoped, but I wouldn't call him desperate. Poirot dismissed Carver with a nod, then turned to Hastings. A man in debt, a wealthy fiancé, a sudden disappearance. The inspector sees a simple story, but I see a web, Hastings. Someone wishes us to believe Edward fled from debt or love, but the blood, it does not fit. The day progressed with further interviews, each guest offering tidbits that muddied the waters. Dr. Grayson revealed that Edward had visited him 2 days before the disappearance, complaining of sleeplessness and requesting a stronger sedative. He seemed agitated, the doctor said, but he wouldn't say why. Evelyn Ward, when pressed again about her cryptic remarks, admitted to overhearing Edward arguing with an unknown man on the telephone a week prior, though she couldn't identify the voice or the subject. By afternoon, the inspector had grown frustrated, his focus fixed on Cecilia. She's hiding something, he insisted to Poirot. Her story about the garden doesn't add up. Why wait so long for Harwood? And that scream, it was theatrical, meant to draw attention. Poirot's response was measured. Mademoiselle Langley is distressed, yes, but her grief is genuine. The scream, the note, the blood, these are pieces of a performance, but not hers. We must look to the one who benefits from this chaos. As evening approached, Poirot requested a timeline of the night's events, which Jenkins and the maids helped compile. The key moments were 10 p.m., guests retire after dinner. 10:30 p.m., Cecilia waits at the rose arbor, returns to her room. 10:47 p.m., Cecilia screams, Jenkins arrives, finds the note. 10:50 p.m., other guests gather, Edward's room found empty. Poirot studied the timeline, his finger tapping the paper.
This is not chance, it is design. The day ended with a startling discovery. A maid, cleaning Edward's room, found a torn scrap of paper tucked beneath the rug. It bore a single word in Edward's handwriting. Blackmail. Poirot examined it, his expression grave.
Mon Dieu, he said softly. The plot sickens. Someone held power over Mr. Harwood, and that someone may still be in this house.
As the guests gathered for dinner, their faces strained under the weight of scrutiny, Poirot sat quietly, his eyes moving from one to another. Hastings, watching his friend, felt a chill. The red herrings, Edward's debts, Cecilia's distress, the convenient cigarette case, were piling up. But Poirot's little grey cells were already cutting through the deception. The truth, Hastings knew, was closer than it seemed, hidden in the contradictions and silences of Ravenwood Hall. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The mist that had cloaked Ravenwood Hall the previous day lingered into the morning, wrapping the estate in a ghostly veil that seemed to mirror the elusive nature of the truth Hercule Poirot sought. The discovery of the word blackmail, scrawled on a scrap of paper in Edward Harwood's room, had sent a ripple of unease through the household, though none dared speak of it openly. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with Poirot, felt the weight of the case pressing ever heavier. The single word, a tantalizing clue that promised to unlock the mystery, if only they could find the key. Poirot, as always, was the picture of calm precision. He sat at the library table, his notebook open, his pen tracing delicate patterns as he reviewed the timeline and statements collected thus far. The rain had stopped, and a weak sun filtered through the windows, casting faint shadows across the room. Hastings, restless, watched his friend's methodical process, knowing that Poirot's mind was already sifting through the minutiae for the one detail that would shift the entire picture.
Mon ami, Poirot said, breaking the silence, it is in the smallest things that the truth reveals itself. A word, a glance, a gesture. These are the threads that weave the tapestry of crime. This blackmail, it is no coincidence. It is a message, but from whom and to whom? Hastings frowned. It was in Edward's handwriting. Could he have been the blackmailer or the victim? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement, Hastings. That is the question. But to answer it, we must return to the scene, to the moment of the disappearance. There is something we have overlooked, something that does not fit.
Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with a practiced flick, and announced his intention to re-examine Edward's room and the garden path. Hastings followed, joined by Inspector Grayson, who, though sceptical of Poirot's methods, could not deny the detective's reputation. The trio made their way to the east wing, where Ed, untouched, preserved as it was the night of his disappearance. The room was orderly, save for the open window and the rug where the blackmail note had been found. Poirot moved with the precision of a surgeon, his eyes scanning every surface. He paused at the writing desk, where a fountain pen lay uncapped, a faint smudge of ink on its nib. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, lifting the pen with a handkerchief. "This pen, it was used recently, yet the note found in Miss Cecilia's room was written in pencil. Why would a man with a fine pen at hand choose a pencil for such an important message?" Hastings, catching Poirot's drift, ventured, "Perhaps he didn't write it, or he was in a hurry?" "Or," Poirot replied, "someone else wrote it, imitating his hand. The tremor I noted in the note's strokes, it suggests haste, yes, but also perhaps a hand unaccustomed to forgery." The inspector, standing by the window, snorted. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, Mr. Poirot. Harwood wrote the note, climbed out the window, and left the cigarette case to throw us off. The blackmail scrap is just a distraction." Poirot's smile was polite, but sharp. "Mon cher Inspector, distractions are the tools of the guilty. But let us test your theory. The window. Show me how a man might climb out." The inspector obliged, opening the window and leaning out. The drop was modest, no more than 6 feet, with soft grass below. "Easy enough," he said. "A fit man like Harwood could manage it without trouble." "Oui, but quietly?" Poirot asked. "No one heard a sound until Miss Cecilia's scream. And the cigarette case, why leave it? To suggest violence? To suggest flight? It is too convenient, too staged." Leaving the room, they followed the path to the rose arbor, where Cecilia had waited for Edward. Poirot knelt again, examining the partial footprint he had noted the previous day. This time, he produced a small measuring tape and noted the dimensions of the print. "It is a man's shoe size 9, perhaps 10, he said, "but the pressure is uneven, as if the wearer stood on one foot or leaned forward. Curious." As they returned to the house, Poirot's attention shifted to a small detail that had gone unnoticed. A single rose petal caught in the hedge near the arbor, its edges slightly crushed. He plucked it carefully, holding it to the light. "This petal," he said, "it is fresh, yet damaged. It fell recently, perhaps the night of the disappearance. And yet Miss Cecilia mentioned no struggle in the garden. Pourquoi?" Back in the library, Poirot requested a private audience with Dr. Lionel Grayson, whose medical expertise might shed light on the blood-stained cigarette case. The doctor entered, his demeanor calm beyond sleeplessness. Fear, perhaps, of blackmail? Dr. Grayson hesitated, his fingers adjusting his spectacles.
"He was anxious, yes. He mentioned pressure, but not its source. I assumed it was related to his engagement or his business dealings."
"And the blood on the cigarette case?" Poirot pressed. "You have seen it? Could it be staged? Animal blood, perhaps?" The doctor frowned.
"It's possible, but without a laboratory I can't say. The quantity was small, more suggestive than conclusive."
Poirot nodded, dismissing the doctor with a courteous nod. He then turned to Hastings, his expression thoughtful.
"The blood, the note, the petal. These are not accidents. They are signs, Hastings, pointing to a mind that plans and deceives. But there is one detail that troubles me most. The time."
He spread out the timeline, his finger tapping the entry for 10:30 p.m., when Cecilia returned to her room.
Miss Cecilia says she heard the hall clock strike 10:30 as she passed, yet Jenkins says the scream came at 10:47 by the clock in her room. 17 minutes, Hastings. A long time to find a note and scream. What was she doing in those minutes?
Hastings blinked. You think she's lying?
Not lying, perhaps, Poirot said, but withholding. She is protecting someone, or something. We must watch her closely.
The afternoon brought a new development. A groundskeeper reported finding a torn piece of fabric in the shrubbery near the garden path, a scrap of blue silk that matched the dress Cecilia had worn the night of the disappearance. Poirot examined it, noting a faint stain that resembled the blood on the cigarette case.
Mon Dieu, he murmured. The net tightens, but around whom?
He requested Cecilia's presence, and she entered the library, her face pale but resolute. Poirot held up the fabric, his voice gentle but firm.
Mademoiselle, this was found near the rose arbor. It is from your dress, is it not? Can you explain how it came to be there?
Cecilia's eyes widened, her hands trembling. I don't know. I was in the garden, yes, but I didn't notice my dress tearing. It must have caught on a thorn. Poirot's gaze was unyielding.
And the blood, mademoiselle. There is a stain, faint but present. Did something happen in the garden you have not told us?
Cecilia shook her head, tears welling. I swear, I don't know. I waited for Edward and he didn't come, that's all. Poirot dismissed her, but his expression was grave.
She is frightened, Hastings, he said. Not only for Mr. Harwood, but for herself. The rose petal, the fabric, the blood, these are clues, but they point in too many directions. We must...
Every pause, Hastings, watching his friend, felt a growing certainty that the little Belgian was closing in on the truth, guided by a detail so small it had escaped them all, until now.
Chapter 7. More lies surface. The air in Ravenwood Hall seemed to grow heavier with each passing day, as if the weight of unspoken truths pressed against its ancient walls. The discovery of the torn silk from Cecilia Langley's dress, stained with what appeared to be blood, had sharpened the suspicions swirling among the guests, and Hercule Poirot's relentless probing was beginning to unravel the carefully woven fabric of their alibis. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the library with his friend, felt the tension like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. The storm had passed, leaving a crisp clarity to the morning, but the clarity within the house was far less certain. Poirot, immaculate as ever in his pinstripe suit, sat at the library table, his notebook filled with precise annotations. The scrap of paper bearing the word blackmail, the blood-stained cigarette case, the rose petal, and now the torn silk. These were the pieces of his puzzle, and he was determined to find how they fit. Mon ami, he said to Hastings, his voice low, the truth is like a shadow. It moves when the light shifts. We have seen the obvious, but now we must look deeper, into the motives that drive these people to lie. Hastings nodded, though his mind struggled to keep pace with Poirot's. The silk and the blood, they point to Cecilia, don't they? But she seemed genuinely shocked when you showed her the fabric. Oui, her shock was real, Poirot agreed, his eyes gleaming. But shock can come from many sources. Fear of discovery, fear for another, or fear of the truth itself. We must uncover what lies behind her fear. Poirot's next move was to summon Evelyn Ward, whose cryptic remarks and guarded demeanor had piqued his interest. She entered the library with a wary expression, her hands clasped tightly before her. Poirot, adopting his most disarming tone, began, Mademoiselle Ward, you have spoken little, yet I sense you know more than you reveal. You said Mr. Harwood was not what he seemed. Tell me, what did you mean? Evelyn's lips tightened, her eyes darting to the window. I only meant that Edward was ambitious. He wanted more than Cecilia's love.
He spoke often of money, of securing his future. I didn't trust him. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And did you overhear anything specific, mademoiselle? A conversation, perhaps, that suggested blackmail? Evelyn hesitated, then nodded slowly. A week ago, I heard him on the telephone in the study. He was angry, saying, "You can't hold that over me forever." I couldn't hear the other voice, but Edward sounded Cecilia, Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I warned her to be careful, but she wouldn't listen. She loved him. Merci, mademoiselle, Poirot said, dismissing her. As she left, he turned to Hastings. Blackmail, Hastings. It is the thread that runs through this mystery. Someone held power over Mr. Harwood, and that power drove him to act, or to be acted upon. The morning progressed with further interviews, each revealing new layers of deception. Lady Margaret, when questioned about Edward's financial inquiries, admitted that he had pressed her about the Langley estate's value, particularly the trust fund set aside for Cecilia. I found it impertinent, she said, her tone icy. But I assumed it was the curiosity of a man planning a future with my daughter. Reginald Carver, the solicitor, was less forthcoming. When Poirot asked about Edward's investments, Carver's discomfort was palpable. He had losses, yes, he said, avoiding Poirot's gaze. But nothing catastrophic. I advised him to be cautious, but he was optimistic. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And did he mention any threats, monsieur? Any person who might have pressured him? Carver shook his head, but his fingers twisted nervously around his pen. No, nothing specific. He was private about such matters. The most revealing interview came with Beatrice Travers, whose love of gossip proved both a blessing and a curse. She entered the library with a gleam in her eye, eager to share her theories. Mr. Poirot, she said, fanning herself, I've been thinking about that cigarette case. It's too perfect, don't you think? Left right where it could be found, stained with blood. If Edward was hurt, why not leave more evidence? It's almost as if someone wanted us to think he's dead. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A perceptive observation, Madame Travers. And who, in your opinion, might wish to create such an impression? Beatrice leaned forward, her voice dropping. Reginald Carver, for one. He's been managing the Langley finances for years, and I've heard whispers that not all is as it seems. And then there's Evelyn. She's always been jealous of Cecilia's happiness. She never liked Edward. Poirot made a note, his expression unreadable. And you, madame? Did you approve of Mr. Harwood? Beatrice sniffed. He was charming, but charm can hide many sins. I told Cecilia to be wary, but young girls are so stubborn. As Beatrice left, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The lies multiply, Hastings. Each person points to another, yet none speak fully of themselves. But there is one detail that disappearance. It was for a train ticket to London, purchased in Edward's name.
Poirot examined it, his brow furrowing.
A ticket to London, yet he did not use it, or did he? We must check with the station.
Inspector Grayson, growing increasingly frustrated, seized on the receipt as evidence of Edward's flight. He planned to leave, Poirot. The ticket proves it. He bought it, staged the scene, and slipped away. Poirot shook his head.
No, mon ami. A man planning to flee does not leave a blood-stained cigarette case or a note about blackmail. This ticket, it is another piece of the performance, but for whose benefit?
As evening approached, Poirot requested a private word with Cecilia, whose emotional state had deteriorated. She entered the library, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling. Poirot, His tone gentle, asked,
Mademoiselle, you have told us of your love for Mr. Harwood. But did he ever speak of being threatened? Of someone holding a secret over him?
Cecilia hesitated, then nodded.
Once, a few weeks ago, he said someone from his past had contacted him. He wouldn't say who, only that it was a mistake he couldn't undo. I begged him to tell me more, but he refused.
Poirot's eyes gleamed.
And did he mention this person being here, at Ravenwood?
No,
Cecilia whispered.
but he was different after that. Nervous, distracted. I thought it was just the engagement, but now…
Poirot dismissed her gently, then turned to Hastings.
Blackmail, a telephone call, a ticket, a torn dress. These are not random. They are the brushstrokes of a careful artist, painting a picture to deceive. But the artist has made a mistake, Hastings. And that mistake is in the timing.
He spread out the timeline once more, his finger lingering on the 17-minute gap between Cecilia's return to her room and her scream.
What happened in those minutes, Hastings? She found the note, yes, but what else? Did she see something, hear something, do something? That is the key.
As the clock struck 7, the household gathered for dinner, their faces etched with strain. Poirot, seated at the table, observed each guest with quiet intensity, noting the way Evelyn avoided Cecilia's gaze, the way Carver's hands shook as he lifted his glass, the way Beatrice's fan moved faster when Edward's name was mentioned. The lies were surfacing, like bubbles rising from the depths, and Poirot's little gray cells were poised to catch them before they burst. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ravenwood Hall, casting a pale glow over the library where Hercule Poirot sat, his notebook a map of clues and contradictions. The air was thick with the residue of yesterday's revelations, the blackmail note, the torn silk, the train ticket, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of Edward Harwood's disappearance. Captain Arthur Hastings
Window felt the weight of the mystery pressing down. The house itself seeming to hold its breath as the truth drew nearer. Poirot's calm demeanour, as always, belied the storm of deduction raging within his little grey cells. The previous evening's dinner had been a strained affair, with the guests' polite facades crumbling under the pressure of Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Cecilia Langley's admission of Edward's cryptic mention of a past mistake had added fuel to the fire, and the household was now a cauldron of suspicion, each person eyeing the others with distrust. Poirot, however, was not content to let the mystery simmer. He had requested a private meeting with Cecilia, sensing that her emotional fragility might yield a breakthrough. She entered the library at 10 o'clock, her face pale and her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Poirot, rising to greet her, gestured to a chair with his usual courtesy. Mademoiselle Langley, he began, his voice gentle but firm. You have carried a heavy burden these past days. I sense that there is more you have not told us, something that weighs upon your heart. Speak, I implore you, for the truth is the only path to peace. Cecilia's hands twisted in her lap, her engagement ring catching the light. For a moment, she seemed on the verge of tears, but then her expression hardened, as if a dam had broken within her. Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice trembling, I've been a fool. I loved Edward, but I saw something that night, something I didn't tell you. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Mon Dieu, mademoiselle, what did you see? Cecilia took a deep breath, her words spilling out in a rush. When I went to the rose arbor to meet Edward, I waited longer than I said, perhaps 20 minutes. It was cold, and I grew anxious. As I turned to leave, I saw a figure in the shadows, near the hedge. It wasn't Edward. It was someone else, moving quickly toward the house. I couldn't see their face, but they were carrying something, a small bundle, wrapped in cloth. I was frightened, so I ran back to my room. That's when I found the note. Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt a jolt of excitement. A figure with a bundle. Cecilia, why didn't you tell us this before? I was afraid, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Please, speak of this to no one. As Cecilia left, her shoulders slumped with relief, Poirot turned to Hastings. Mon ami, we have our turning point. A figure in the garden, a bundle, the timing. It suggests a plan, not a spur-of-the-moment act. But who was this figure? And what was in the bundle?
Hastings frowned. Could it have been Edward, leaving with his belongings?
No, Hastings, Poirot said, shaking his head. If it was Edward, why the note? Why the blood? No. This figure is another player in our drama, and the bundle, perhaps it holds the key to the cigarette case, or to the blackmail.
Poirot's next move was to summon Jenkins, the butler, whose impeccable composure had begun to show cracks under the strain of the investigation. Jenkins entered, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of professionalism. Poirot, adopting a conversational tone, said, Monsieur Jenkins, you are the eyes and ears of this house. On the night of Mr. Harwood's disappearance, did you see anyone in the garden, perhaps carrying a bundle? Jenkins hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face.
No, sir, he replied.
I was in the servants' quarters until I heard Miss Cecilia scream. The garden was not my concern that night.
Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, you checked Mr. Harwood's room immediately after. Did you notice anything unusual? Perhaps a cloth, a bag, something out of place?
Jenkins shook his head, but his fingers twitched slightly.
Nothing, sir.
The room was as I described, bed undisturbed, window open. Poirot dismissed him, but his expression was thoughtful.
Jenkins knows more than he says, Hastings. His hesitation, it betrays him. We must watch him closely.
The afternoon brought a new development. A telegram from the Exeter laboratory confirming that the blood on the cigarette case was human, though its type could not yet be matched to Edward's. Inspector Grayson, seizing on this, declared, "This proves foul play, Poirot. Harwood's dead, or at least injured. We should search the grounds again." Poirot, however, was unconvinced.
The blood is a clue, yes, but it is also a distraction. Why leave the cigarette case so prominently? It is as if someone wishes us to believe in violence, to stop looking for Mr. Harwood alive.
Determined to test this theory, Poirot requested a thorough search of the servants' quarters, where Jenkins and the maids resided. The inspector, though skeptical, complied, and the search yielded a startling find. In a locked drawer in Jenkins's room, hidden beneath a stack of linens, was a small vial of red liquid, suspiciously similar to blood. Jenkins, when confronted, turned pale but maintained his composure.
That such a substance should be found now. Jenkins offered no further explanation, and Poirot let him go, but the discovery added another layer to the mystery. Hastings, puzzled, asked, "Do you think Jenkins staged the blood on the cigarette case?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied, "but not alone. The figure in the garden, the bundle, the blackmail note, these suggest a conspiracy, Hastings. Someone in this house is orchestrating a performance, and Jenkins may be a player, but not the director." As evening approached, The household gathered in the drawing room, their nerves frayed by the mounting evidence. Cecilia, emboldened by her confession, avoided Evelyn's gaze, while Beatrice Travers whispered loudly about Jenkins's suspicious behaviour. Reginald Carver, usually reserved, snapped at her to be quiet, his outburst drawing startled looks. Lady Margaret, her composure strained, called for calm, but her voice lacked its usual authority. Poirot, standing by the fireplace, observed the scene with quiet intensity. "The truth is near, Hastings," he whispered. "The lies are crumbling, and the emotions, they betray the guilty. Tomorrow we shall set a trap, and the one who moves first will reveal themselves." As the clock struck 8, a distant rumble of thunder echoed across the estate, a reminder of the storm that had passed, and the one yet to come. Poirot's little grey cells were closing in, and the emotional cracks in Ravenwood's facade were about to widen, exposing the heart of the mystery. Chapter 9. The Trap. The morning at Ravenwood Hall dawned with a deceptive calm, the mist having lifted to reveal a sky of pale blue, as if the estate itself sought to mask the turmoil within its walls. The revelations of the previous day, Cecilia's confession about the shadowy figure in the garden, the vial of red liquid found in Jenkins's room, and the mounting evidence of blackmail, had tightened the web of suspicion around the household. Hercule Poirot, ever the orchestrator of truth, sat in the library, his hands folded neatly over his notebook, his green eyes gleaming with the anticipation of a hunter setting a snare. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the window, felt a thrill of expectation, knowing that Poirot was about to spring a trap that would force the guilty to betray themselves. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice low and deliberate, "today we shall apply pressure, subtle but precise. The guilty party, they are nervous, Hastings. They have woven a clever deception, but even the strongest web breaks under strain. We shall gather the household and present a challenge, and in their reactions, we shall see the truth." Hastings nodded, his curiosity piqued. "What sort of challenge, Poirot?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A reconstruction, mon cher. We shall recreate the night of Mr. Harwood's disappearance." Requested that the entire household assemble in the drawing room at noon, an order delivered with such authority that even Lady Margaret Langley, usually imperious, complied without protest. The guests filed in, their faces a gallery of apprehension. Cecilia sat near her mother, her hands clasped tightly, her engagement ring a stark reminder of her missing fiancé. Dr. Lionel Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. Beatrice Travers clutched her fan, her eyes darting from face to face. Reginald Carver, his expression pinched, sat rigidly, while Evelyn Ward's gaze flickered nervously toward the door. Jenkins, the butler, stood at attention, his composure strained but intact. Inspector Grayson, though skeptical of Poirot's theatrics, stood by the fireplace, ready to observe. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. "We have reached a critical moment in our investigation. The disappearance of Mr. Edward Harwood is no simple matter. It is a puzzle of lies, blackmail, and carefully placed clues. Today, we shall recreate the events of that night, and I ask for your cooperation. Each of you will take your place as you were at 10 o'clock, when the household retired." A murmur of unease rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. "We shall begin with Miss Cecilia, who left for the Rose Arbor at 10. Mademoiselle, if you please, go to the garden now and wait, as you did. The rest of you, return to your rooms, or wherever you claimed to be. I shall observe, and we shall see what inconsistencies emerge." Cecilia rose, her face pale but resolute, and left for the garden. The others dispersed, some reluctantly, to their respective locations, Lady Margaret to her room, Dr. Grayson to his, Beatrice to the drawing room,
Carver to his study, Evelyn to her room, and Jenkins to the servants' quarters. Poirot, accompanied by Hastings and the inspector, moved to the east wing, where he could oversee the house and garden. As Cecilia stood by the rose arbour, her figure small against the towering hedges, Poirot watched from a window, his eyes scanning for movement. "Regardez, Hastings," he whispered. "The garden is the key. The figure Mademoiselle Cecilia saw, the bundle, it happened here, in those 17 minutes before her scream." The reconstruction proceeded, with Poirot timing each action meticulously. At 10:30, Cecilia returned to the house, as she had described, passing the hall clock as it struck. Poirot, standing in the corridor, noted the time, exactly 10:30. He then moved to Cecilia's room, where the overturned chair and broken vase had been left untouched. "The note was here," he said, pointing to the dressing table. "And the scream came at—" And within moments, Jenkins appeared, his face pale but composed, followed by Lady Margaret, Dr. Grayson, Carver, and Evelyn. Beatrice, claiming to have been in the drawing room, arrived last, her fan fluttering nervously. Poirot gathered them in Cecilia's room, his expression unreadable. "Merci, all of you. This exercise has been most illuminating. But there is one detail that does not fit. Mademoiselle Cecilia, you waited 17 minutes before screaming. Why?" Cecilia flushed, her voice trembling. I was in shock. I read the note, and I couldn't believe it. I sat there trying to understand." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "And in those minutes, did you hear anything? Footsteps, perhaps, or the sound of a window opening?" Cecilia shook her head, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. Poirot turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. "Someone in this house knows what happened to Mr. Harwood. The note, the blood, the torn silk, these are not accidents. They are the work of a mind that seeks to deceive. And I, Hercule Poirot, will not be deceived." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Then, to everyone's surprise, Evelyn Ward stepped forward, her face ashen. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't keep silent any longer. I saw something that night too. Not in the garden, but from my window. I saw a figure leaving Edward's room, through the window, just before Cecilia screamed." A gasp rippled through the group. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Mademoiselle Ward, describe this figure." "It was dark," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "But they were tall, and they moved quickly, carrying something. A bag, I think. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Merci, mademoiselle. Your courage has brought us closer to the truth. But we must know who was this figure." The inspector is in the contradictions. As the guests dispersed, their nerves frayed, Poirot pulled Hastings aside. "The trap has worked, Hastings. The guilty one is nervous now, knowing we are close. The figure with the bundle, the figure at the window, they are the key. We must search again, and we must watch for the one who moves first." That afternoon, Poirot and Hastings searched Edward's room once more, finding a hidden compartment in the writing desk. Inside was a letter, partially burned, addressed to Edward. The legible fragment read, "You will pay, or the truth will come out." Poirot's eye gleamed. "Blackmail, Hastings. The proof is here. But who wrote this, and what truth did they threaten to reveal?" As evening fell, the household gathered for dinner, their faces etched with fear and suspicion. Poirot, seated at the table, observed each guest, noting the way Jenkins' hands trembled as he poured wine, the way Carver avoided Evelyn's gaze, the way Beatrice's fan moved faster when Edward's name was mentioned. The trap had been set, and the guilty party was teetering on the edge of exposure. The little grey cells were closing in, and the truth was about to emerge from the shadows of Ravenwood Hall.
Chapter 10. The Reveal. The drawing room of Ravenwood Hall was a stage set for revelation, its heavy curtains drawn against the late afternoon light, casting the gathered guests in a soft, almost theatrical glow. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very walls held their breath, awaiting the moment when Hercule Poirot would unravel the mystery of Edward Harwood's disappearance. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt his pulse quicken, knowing that Poirot's flair for the dramatic was about to culminate in a stunning denouement. The little Belgian detective stood at the center of the room, his posture erect, his moustache impeccably waxed, his green eyes gleaming with the certainty of truth. The household had been summoned at Poirot's request, their faces a gallery of apprehension and curiosity. Cecilia Langley sat on a velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes red but resolute. Lady Margaret, beside her, maintained her regal composure, though her fingers gripped the armrest with uncharacteristic tension. Dr. Lionel Grayson adjusted his spectacles nervously, while Beatrice Travers fanned herself with exaggerated vigor, her sharp eyes darting from face to face. Reginald Carver, his expression pinched, sat rigidly, and Evelyn Ward's gaze flickered between Poirot and the door, as if contemplating flight. Jenkins, the butler, stood at attention, his face a mask of strained professionalism. Inspector Grayson, leaning against the mantelpiece, watched with a mix of skepticism and grudging respect. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. "We have come to the moment of truth in the affair of Mr. Edward Harwood's disappearance. For days, we have been entangled in a web of lies, red herrings and carefully placed clues. But the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot, they do not rest until the truth is laid bare. Let us reconstruct the events and reveal the one who sought to deceive us." He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sweeping the room. It began with a scream, Miss Cecilia's cry at 10:47 on the night of Mr. Harwood's disappearance. A note was found, saying, "I cannot stay, forgive me." A cigarette case, stained with blood, was discovered in the garden. A scrap of paper bearing the word blackmail was hidden in Mr. Harwood's room. A torn piece of silk from Miss Cecilia's dress, a train ticket, a vial of red liquid, a rose petal, a burned letter, these are the pieces of our puzzle. But how do they fit? Poirot paused, letting the silence build tension. First, let us consider the note. It was in Mr. Harwood's handwriting, but to suggest violence, or to suggest flight. He turned to Cecilia, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle Langley, you waited in the rose arbor for Mr. Harwood, but he did not come. You saw a figure in the shadows, carrying a bundle. You returned to your room at 10:30, yet did not scream until 10:47. 17 minutes, mademoiselle, a curious gap. You said you were in shock, but I believe you saw something else, something you feared to reveal." Cecilia's eyes widened, but she remained silent. Poirot continued, turning to Evelyn. "Mademoiselle Ward, you saw a figure leaving Mr. Harwood's room through the window, carrying a bag. 2 figures, 2 bundles, yet no one saw Mr. Harwood himself. This is no coincidence." He faced the group, his voice rising. "Let us examine the timeline. At 10, the household retires. At 10:30, Miss Cecilia returns from the garden. At 10:47, she screams. In those 17 minutes, a note is placed, a window is opened, a cigarette case is dropped, and a figure moves through the shadows. This is not the work of chance. It is the work of a plan. Poirot's gaze settled on Jenkins. Monsieur Jenkins, you were the first to reach Miss Cecilia's room. You found her with the note, the chair overturned, the vase broken. You checked Mr. Harwood's room and found it empty. Yet, in your quarters, we found a vial of red liquid. Theatrical makeup, you said. A curious memento for a butler, n'est-ce pas? Jenkins stiffened, his face paling. I explained, sir. It was from a play. Oui, but they're play within a play, Poirot said, his voice sharp. The blood on the cigarette case. It was not real blood, but your makeup, applied to create the illusion of violence. You placed the case in the garden, did you not? To mislead us. A gasp rippled through the room. Jenkins opened his mouth to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. Not yet, monsieur. You are but a pawn in this game. Let us turn to the mastermind. He pivoted to Reginald Carver, whose face had turned ashen. Monsieur Carver, you handled Mr. Harwood's investments, which were failing. You knew of his debts, his desperation. You also knew of the Langley Trust, which Miss Cecilia would inherit upon marriage. But there was a problem, was there not? Mr. Harwood discovered something you wished to keep hidden. Carver's hands trembled, but he remained silent. Poirot continued, relentless. The burned letter in Mr. Harwood's desk, it spoke of a truth you feared. You were embezzling from the Langley estate, siphoning funds to cover your own losses. Mr. Harwood found evidence, and he confronted you. He threatened to expose you unless you paid him. A classic case of blackmail, but with you as the victim. Beatrice Travers gasped, her fan dropping to her lap. Devised a plan. You lured Mr. Harwood to the garden, promising a resolution. There, you struck him, not to kill, but to subdue. With Jenkins' help, you staged his disappearance, planting the note, the cigarette case, the torn silk to suggest a struggle. The figure Miss Cecilia saw, the figure Mademoiselle Ward saw, it was you, carrying Mr. Harwood, unconscious, to a hiding place. Carver leapt to his feet, his voice shaking. This is preposterous. You have no proof. Poirot's smile was cold. Au contraire, monsieur. The rose petal, crushed in the garden, it bore a trace of your cologne, which I detected when we first met. The footprint near the arbor, size 10, matching your shoes. And the letter, partially burned, it bore your initials, R.C., in the corner. You thought to destroy it, but you were careless. Carver collapsed into his chair, his face crumpling. I didn't mean to hurt him. He was going to ruin me. I hid him in the old boathouse, drugged with Dr. Grayson's sedative. He's alive, I swear. The room erupted in chaos. Cecilia sobbed, Lady Margaret demanded answers, and the inspector moved to restrain Carver. Poirot raised his hand for silence. Mesdames et messieurs, the truth is revealed. Mr. Harwood is alive, hidden to protect Monsieur Carver's crime. Jenkins, under duress, assisted, but it was Carver who orchestrated this deception. As the inspector led Carver away, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. The little grey cells, they see what others miss. The truth was in the details, the petal, the footprint, the lies that could not hold. The household dispersed, shaken but relieved, as Cecilia rushed to the boathouse, where Edward was found, groggy but unharmed. Poirot watched from the window, his expression one of quiet satisfaction, the puzzle complete. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawns of Ravenwood Hall, its golden light a stark contrast to the turmoil that had gripped the estate only hours before. The revelation of Reginald Carver's guilt and the discovery of Edward Harwood, alive but shaken in the old boathouse, had brought a fragile calm to the household. The air, once thick with suspicion and fear, now carried a tentative sense of resolution, though the scars of deception lingered. Hercule Poirot, standing by the library window, gazed out at the gardens, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression one of quiet contemplation. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby, felt a familiar awe at his friend's ability to unravel the most tangled of mysteries. Yet he sensed that Poirot's work was not yet complete. The household had gathered briefly after Edward's rescue. They prepare a room for Edward's recovery. Dr. Lionel Grayson, his medical expertise now in demand, attended to Edward, confirming that the sedative's effects would soon wear off. Beatrice Travers, ever the gossip, whispered excitedly about Carver's downfall, while Evelyn Ward remained silent, her expression a mix of guilt and relief. Jenkins, implicated as Carver's reluctant accomplice, had been taken into custody alongside the solicitor, his stoic facade finally crumbling under the weight of his actions. Poirot, however, had withdrawn to the library, declining to join the flurry of activity. Hastings, sensing his friend's need for reflection, followed, closing the door behind him. "Poirot," he ventured, "you've done it again. You found Edward, exposed Carver, and untangled the whole mess. But you seem pensive. Is something still troubling you?" Poirot turned from the window, his green eyes thoughtful. "Mon ami Hastings, the case is solved, oui, but the mind of Hercule Poirot does not rest so easily. Each mystery leaves its mark, a reminder of the complexities of the human heart. This affair, it was not merely about blackmail or greed, but about fear, desperation, and the lengths to which one will go to protect a secret." He crossed to the table, where his notebook lay open, its pages filled with meticulous notes. "Let us reflect, Hastings, on what we have learned. Monsieur Carver, a man of respectability, was driven to crime by his own weakness, embezzlement, a slow poison that eroded his honor. Mr. Harwood, ambitious but reckless, saw an opportunity to exploit Carver's secret, not realizing the danger he courted. And Jenkins, loyal but weak, became an unwilling pawn in their game. It is a tragedy, n'est-ce pas, that such small flaws can lead to such great consequences." Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the dramatic scene in the drawing room. "It was the rose petal that clinched it, wasn't it? That and the footprint. I'd never have noticed them." Poirot's smile was faint but warm. "The little details, Hastings, they are the language of truth. The petal, crushed and scented with Carver's cologne, told me he was in the garden, not in his study as he claimed. The footprint, size 10, matched his shoes, not Mr. Harwood's. And the burned letter, with its telltale initials, it was the final thread that unraveled his lies. But it was the psychology, mon ami, that guided me. Carver's fear, his hesitation, his overeager alibis, they betrayed him as surely as any clue." Hastings leaned forward, curious. "And Cecilia's 17-minute delay, you said it was key. What did you make of it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement. Those 17 minutes were the heart of the deception. Mademoiselle, from his past, had planted a seed of mistrust. When she found the note, she hesitated, fearing he had abandoned her. Her scream was not just shock, but anguish, the cry of a heart betrayed. It was this emotion that told me she was not part of the plot, but a victim of its ripples." Hastings shook his head in admiration. "You see things I never would, Poirot. But what about Jenkins? Why did he help Carver?" Poirot sighed, a rare note of melancholy in his voice. "Jenkins, poor man, was bound by loyalty and fear. Carver, as the family solicitor, held influence over the staff. He coerced Jenkins with threats, perhaps of dismissal, perhaps of exposing some minor indiscretion. The vial of theatrical makeup was Jenkins' contribution, a clumsy attempt to stage a crime. But his heart was not in it, his trembling hands, his hesitation. They told me he acted under duress."
The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 5, its soft notes echoing in the quiet room. Poirot closed his notebook, his movements deliberate. This case, Hastings, reminds us that the human soul is a labyrinth. Greed, love, fear, they twist and turn, leading to actions we scarcely understand ourselves. Hercule Poirot solves the crime, yes, but he also mourns the frailty that makes such crimes possible. Hastings, moved by Poirot's words, asked, "What happens now? Will Edward and Cecilia reconcile? And the Langley estate? What of Carver's embezzlement?" Poirot shrugged, a Gallic gesture of resignation. "The heart of Mademoiselle Cecilia is strong but wounded. She and Mr. Harwood will need time to heal the trust that was broken. As for the estate, Lady Margaret is a woman of resolve. She will ensure its recovery, though the scars of Carver's betrayal will linger. For us, mon ami, our work is done. The truth is revealed, and we must leave Ravenwood to mend itself." As evening approached, Poirot prepared to depart, his small suitcase packed with the precision of a military campaign. Hastings accompanied him to the entrance hall, where Lady Margaret awaited, her expression a mix of gratitude and reserve. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "you have saved us from a great scandal. I'm in your debt." Poirot bowed, his hat in hand. "Madame, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to bring order where there is chaos. I wish you and your daughter peace." Cecilia, standing nearby with Edward, who leaned on Dr. Grayson's arm, stepped forward. "Thank you, Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I thought I'd lost everything, but you gave me back hope." Poirot's smile was warm. "Mademoiselle, hope is the light that guides us through the darkness. Hold fast to it." Passing countryside, his expression serene.
"You know, Poirot," Hastings said, "I thought this case might stump even you. But you never doubted, did you?"
Poirot chuckled softly. "Doubt, Hastings? No. The little grey cells, they do not doubt. They observe. They deduce. They triumph. But always, they remind me that the greatest mystery is not the crime, but the human heart." As the car sped toward London, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting Ravenwood Hall into shadow. The mystery was solved, the guilty exposed, and Hercule Poirot, with his unerring logic and unshakable moral compass, had once again restored order to a world thrown into disarray. Chapter 12. The Aftermath. The dawn broke over Ravenwood Hall with a clarity that seemed to wash away the shadows of the past few days, though the echoes of the mystery lingered in the minds of its inhabitants. The revelation of Reginald Carver's embezzlement and his desperate attempt to silence Edward Harwood had left the household reeling, yet the return of Edward, alive and recovering, offered a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. Captain Arthur Hastings, preparing to depart with Hercule Poirot, stood in the entrance hall, his suitcase at his feet, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. The grand estate, with its ivy-clad walls and sprawling gardens, seemed quieter now, as if relieved of the burden of its secrets. Poirot, as ever, was the picture of precision, his overcoat buttoned and his hat tilted at its customary angle. He stood by the front door, exchanging final words with Inspector Grayson, who had overseen the formalities of Carver's and Jenkins' arrests. The inspector, though initially skeptical of Poirot's methods, now regarded him with a grudging respect. "You've done us a service, Mr. Poirot," he said, shaking the detective's hand. "I'd have pinned this on Harwood's flight and missed the real crime altogether." Poirot inclined his head, his smile modest but knowing. "Mon cher inspecteur, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to see what others overlook. The little grey cells, they do not rest until justice is served."
As the inspector departed to coordinate with the Exeter police, Hastings joined Poirot, his mind still buzzing with the intricacies of the case. "It's remarkable, Poirot," he said, "how you pieced it all together. The rose petal, the footprint, the letter. But what I can't shake is how close Carver came to getting away with it. If you hadn't noticed those details." Poirot raised a hand, his expression serene. "Mon ami, the guilty always leave a trace, however small. It is the task of Poirot to find it. Monsieur Carver believed he could outwit us with his staged disappearance, but he underestimated the power of observation and logic." Poirot, with a rare warmth in her eyes. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "your presence here has preserved my family's honor and my daughter's future. I am not accustomed to being in anyone's debt, but I am in yours." Poirot bowed, his moustache twitching with a hint of pride. "Madame, it is an honor to serve. The order and symmetry of truth, these are the rewards of Hercule Poirot." Cecilia Langley, supported by Edward Harwood, who leaned heavily on a cane, stepped forward. Edward's face was pale, but his eyes were clear, free of the haze of the sedative. "Mr. Poirot," Cecilia said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I thought I'd lost Edward forever. Your brilliance gave him back to me. How can I ever thank you?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Mademoiselle, your happiness is thanks enough, but I urge you and Monsieur Harwood to be cautious. Love is a precious thing, but it must be built on trust, not secrets." Edward nodded, his expression contrite. "I was a fool, Mr. Poirot. I thought I could handle Carver's threats myself, but I only made things worse. I'll spend the rest of my life making it right with Cecilia." As the couple stepped back, Evelyn Ward approached, her face a mix of relief and shame. "I should have spoken sooner," she said quietly. "I saw that figure at the window, but I was afraid of what it might mean for Cecilia. I'm sorry." Poirot's smile was gentle. "Mademoiselle Ward, courage comes in many forms. Your silence was born of loyalty, and your truth, when it came, helped us find the path. Do not reproach yourself." Beatrice Travers, never one to miss a moment of drama, fluttered her fan and declared, "Mr. Poirot, you're a marvel. I shall tell everyone in London about this. A real-life mystery, solved by a genius." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Madame Travers, your enthusiasm is most flattering, but I ask only that you tell the truth, not the embellishments of gossip." Dr. Lionel Grayson, lingering at the edge of the group, offered a nod of respect. "I misjudged you, Mr. Poirot," he said. "I thought this was a simple case of nerves or romance gone wrong. You've shown me the value of looking deeper." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur le Docteur, the human mind is a labyrinth, but it leaves clues for those who seek them. Your skill was vital in ensuring Monsieur Harwood's recovery." As the farewells concluded, Poirot and Hastings stepped into the waiting motorcar, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as they pulled away from Ravenwood Hall. The estate receded into the distance, its grandeur softened by the morning light. Hastings settling into his seat. "Mistakes." Poirot nodded, his voice thoughtful. "Oui, Hastings. Each case is a mirror, reflecting the frailties of those involved. Monsieur Carver sought to protect his reputation, but in doing so, he lost it. Monsieur Harwood sought to gain through blackmail, but nearly lost his life. And Mademoiselle Cecilia, her love was tested by doubt, yet it endured. The mystery, it is solved, but the lessons, they linger." Hastings leaned back, considering Poirot's words. "What will happen to them now? Carver and Jenkins are in custody, but the Langley family, they've been shaken to the core." The Langleys are resilient, Poirot replied. Lady Margaret will restore the estate's finances, though it will take time. Mademoiselle Cecilia and Monsieur Harwood, they will rebuild, if they can learn to trust. As for Jenkins, his role was small, his punishment likely lenient. But the heart of Ravenwood, it will heal, for it is built on love, not deceit. The car wound through the Devon lanes, the hedgerows vibrant with late summer blooms. Hastings, struck by a sudden thought, asked, "And what about you, Poirot? You always seem so certain, so unshaken. Don't these cases ever weigh on you?" Poirot's smile was wistful. They weigh, mon ami, but they also inspire. To bring order to chaos, to find truth in lies, this is the purpose of Hercule Poirot. The little grey cells, they are my compass, guiding me through the darkness of human nature. As the sun climbed higher, the car approached the train station, where Poirot and Hastings would return to London. Ravenwood Hall was now a memory, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Poirot's mind. Yet Hastings knew that this case, like so many others, would linger in his thoughts, a testament to the brilliance of his friend and the enduring complexity of the human heart. Chapter 13. The Unseen Motive. The train to London rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the tumultuous events at Ravenwood Hall. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated opposite Hercule Poirot in their first-class compartment, watched the Devon countryside blur past, its green hills and hedgerows a stark contrast to the dark secrets they had uncovered. Poirot, his eyes half closed, appeared to be dozing, but Hastings knew better. His friend's mind was never at rest, always turning over the details of a case, even one so recently resolved. Yet something nagged at Hastings, a lingering sense that not all questions had been answered. "Poirot," he ventured, breaking the silence, "you solved the mystery, found Edward, and exposed Carver's crimes. But there's something I can't shake. Why did Edward pursue unseen motive? You are correct. There is more to Monsieur Harwood's actions than we have fully explored. The little grey cells. They have been pondering this, and I believe there is one final thread to unravel." Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. "You mean there's more to the case? But Carver confessed. Edward is safe, and the blackmail was explained." Poirot raised a finger, his expression serious. "The blackmail, oui. But the why of it? This we have not fully examined. Monsieur Harwood's desperation was not merely financial, I suspect. There is a personal motive, a shadow from his past, that pushed him to confront Carver. We must return to Ravenwood, Hastings, for one final inquiry." Hastings blinked, startled. "Return? But we're halfway to London." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "A detour, mon ami. The truth, it waits for no train schedule. I have sent a telegram to Inspector Grayson requesting that the household remain until our return. We shall arrive by evening." The train pulled into Exeter, where Poirot and Hastings disembarked, hiring a motor car to take them back to Ravenwood Hall. As the car wound through the familiar lanes, Hastings felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Poirot's sudden decision suggested he had seen something the rest of them had missed, a detail so subtle it had slipped through the cracks of the investigation. They arrived at Ravenwood as dusk settled, the estate's lights glowing warmly against the gathering twilight. Lady Margaret greeted them with surprise, but no resistance, her composure tempered by curiosity. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I thought your work here was done. What brings you back?" Poirot bowed, his manner impeccable. "Madame, there is one final question that must be answered, a matter of the heart rather than the crime. I ask that the household gather once more, and that Monsieur Harwood, if he is able, join us.
The drawing room was reconvened, its atmosphere charged with a new tension. Cecilia, her face radiant with relief at Edward's recovery, sat beside him, his hand clasped in hers. Edward, though still pale, was alert, his eyes wary as they met Poirot's. Dr. Grayson, Beatrice Travers, and Evelyn Ward took their places, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Inspector Grayson, summoned from Exeter, stood by the door, his notebook at the ready. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice steady, "I returned to Ravenwood to address a question that lingers in the shadow of our solved mystery. Monsieur Carver's crime was clear: embezzlement, blackmail, and a staged disappearance to protect his secret. But why did Monsieur Harwood, a man in love, risk his future by confronting Carver with blackmail? This is the unseen motive, and it is here we find the final truth."
Desk, the one partially burned. It spoke of a truth you feared. What was this truth, and why did you press Monsieur Carver? Edward's face paled, his hand tightening around Cecilia's. I don't know what you mean," he said, his voice unsteady. Poirot's smile was gentle but firm. "No, monsieur, you do know. The little grey cells, they have pieced together the fragments. You mentioned to Mademoiselle Cecilia a mistake from your past, one that someone held over you. This was no mere debt, it was a personal secret, one that drove you to desperate measures. Tell us, what was it?"
Cecilia's eyes widened, her grip on Edward's hand loosening. Edward swallowed, his gaze dropping to the floor. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was a woman, from years ago. In London. A brief affair before I met Cecilia. She claimed I'd promised to marry her, but I hadn't. When I ended it, she threatened to ruin me, to tell everyone I'd abandoned her. Carver knew her. She was a client of his. He used her story to pressure me, threatening to tell Cecilia unless I paid him." A gasp escaped Cecilia, her hand pulling away. "Edward, why didn't you tell me?" "I was ashamed," Edward said, his voice breaking. "I loved you, Cecilia, and I didn't want to lose you. When I found out Carver was stealing from your family, I thought I could turn the tables, force him to back off by threatening to expose him. But he was cleverer than I thought." Poirot nodded, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "Merci, Monsieur Harwood. Your candor completes the picture. Carver, knowing your secret, used it to manipulate you, just as you sought to manipulate him. This dance of blackmail led to his desperate act, staging your disappearance to silence you. The rose petal, the footprint, the vial of makeup, these were his tools, but your secret was the spark." Cecilia's eyes filled with tears, but she reached for Edward's hand again. "You should have trusted me," she said softly. "I would have understood." Lady Margaret, her face stern, spoke up. "Mr. Poirot, what does this mean for my daughter's future? Can we move past this?" Poirot's gaze softened. "Madame, the heart of Mademoiselle Cecilia is strong. She and Monsieur Harwood have a chance to rebuild, if they choose honesty over secrets. The estate, it will recover under your guidance. The truth, though painful, is the foundation of healing." Beatrice Travers, her fan stilled, murmured,
"Mon ami," he said to Hastings, "this case reminds us that the greatest mysteries are not of crime, but of the heart. Monsieur Harwood's mistake was not his past, but his fear of it. Truth, always, is the better path."
As they stepped into the motor car, Ravenwood Hall receded into the twilight, its secrets fully unveiled. Hastings, glancing at Poirot, felt a renewed admiration for his friend's ability to see beyond the surface, to the unseen motives that drive human actions. Chapter 14. The Shadows of Truth. The evening sky over Ravenwood Hall was painted with hues of amber and violet, a serene backdrop to the turmoil that had finally begun to settle within the estate's ancient walls. The revelation of Edward Harwood's hidden past and the motives behind his blackmail attempt had brought a bittersweet clarity to the household, yet the air still carried the weight of truths uncovered and relationships tested. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing in the entrance hall with his suitcase packed, felt a mix of relief and melancholy as he prepared to depart with Hercule Poirot. The little Belgian detective, his appearance as impeccable as ever, adjusted his hat and surveyed the hall with a quiet satisfaction, as if bidding farewell to a stage where his genius had once again triumphed. The household had gathered one final time to see Poirot and Hastings off, their faces reflecting a spectrum of emotions. Cecilia Langley, her hand entwined with Edward's, stood with a newfound resolve, her eyes bright despite the shadows of betrayal. Edward, still pale but steadier on his feet, offered a nod of gratitude, his expression one of humbled determination. Lady Margaret Langley, her regal composure fully restored, presided over the scene with a quiet authority, her gratitude tempered by the knowledge of the estate's financial wounds. Dr. Lionel Grayson, his medical bag at his side, offered a respectful smile, while Beatrice Travers, her fan fluttering gently, seemed almost disappointed that the drama had concluded. Evelyn Ward, standing slightly apart, met Cecilia's gaze with a tentative warmth, their friendship strained but not broken. "Mr. Poirot," Lady Margaret said, stepping forward, "your presence has been a beacon in our darkness. You have not only saved my daughter's future, but restored order to Ravenwood. I trust you will return, should we ever need your services again." Poirot bowed, his moustache twitching with a hint of pride. "Madame, it is the privilege of Hercule Poirot to bring light where shadows fall. I wish you and your family strength as you rebuild." Cecilia approached, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Poirot, I was lost in doubt and fear, but you showed me that truth, however painful, is the only way forward. Edward and I will find our way, thanks to you." Poirot's eyes softened. "Mademoiselle, the heart is resilient, but it thrives on honesty."
Chapter, if you choose trust over secrecy. Edward, his grip tightening on Cecilia's hand, added, "I'll never keep another secret from her, Mr. Poirot. You've shown me what I nearly lost." Poirot nodded, then turned to Evelyn, who had remained silent. "Mademoiselle Ward, your loyalty to your friend was tested, but it endured. Your courage in speaking the truth, however late, was vital." Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and she managed a small nod. "I only wanted to protect Cecilia. Thank you for seeing that." Beatrice Travers, unable to resist a final word, chimed in, "Mr. Poirot, you've given us a tale to rival any novel. I shall dine out on this story for months." Poirot's smile was indulgent. "Madame Travers, tell the tale as you will, but remember, the truth is more compelling than embellishment." Dr. Grayson stepped forward, his tone earnest. "Your methods, Mr. Poirot, have taught me to look beyond the surface. I'll not forget it." "Merci, Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot replied. "The surface is but a mask. The truth lies beneath in the details." As the farewells concluded, Poirot and Hastings stepped into the motor car, the gravel crunching beneath the tires as they pulled away from Ravenwood Hall. The estate faded into the twilight, its grandeur softened by the gathering dusk. Hastings, settling into his seat, glanced at Poirot, who gazed out at the passing countryside, his expression one of quiet reflection. "You know, Poirot," Hastings said, "this case felt like peeling back layers of an onion. Each revelation brought us closer to the core.
but it also stung. Edward's secret, Carver's embezzlement, Jenkins's complicity. It's also human. Poirot nodded, his voice thoughtful. Oui, Hastings. The human heart is a tapestry of light and shadow. Monsieur Harwood's mistake was not his past, but his fear of its exposure. Monsieur Carver's crime was born of greed, but also of desperation to maintain his facade. And Jenkins, poor man, was caught in the web of loyalty and coercion. Each acted from their own truth, yet each created a shadow that obscured the light. Hastings leaned back, considering Poirot's words. And Cecilia, what do you think will happen to her and Edward? Can they really move past this? Poirot's gaze was distant, as if seeing beyond the horizon. Love, mon ami, is a powerful force, but it requires trust to endure. Mademoiselle Cecilia is strong, and Monsieur Harwood, chastened by his ordeal, may yet prove worthy of her. They have seen the shadows of truth. Now they must those involved. They do not change Hercule Poirot, but they remind him of his purpose, to seek the truth, to restore order. The little grey cells, they are my guide, but the heart, it feels the weight of every shadow uncovered. As the car approached the Exeter station, where they would catch the late train to London, Hastings felt a renewed admiration for his friend's clarity of purpose. Ravenwood Hall was behind them, its secrets laid bare, but the lessons of the case, about trust, deception, and the enduring power of truth, would linger long after the train carried them away. The platform was quiet, the evening air cool and crisp. Poirot, adjusting his scarf, glanced at Hastings with a rare warmth. Mon ami, we have faced another puzzle and emerged victorious. But always it is the journey, not the destination, that teaches us the most. As they boarded the train, the whistle sounded, and Ravenwood Hall became a memory, its shadows dispelled by the relentless logic and compassion of Hercule Poirot. The truth had been found, the guilty exposed, and the heart of the mystery laid bare, leaving only the promise of a new dawn for those left behind. Chapter 15. The Final Curtain. The train to London hummed steadily through the night, its gentle sway a soothing contrast to the turbulence that had defined the days at Ravenwood Hall. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the dimly lit compartment, gazed out at the darkened countryside, the stars above twinkling like the fragments of truth Hercule Poirot had so masterfully pieced together. Poirot himself sat opposite, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes half closed in a state of serene reflection. The mystery of Edward Harwood's disappearance had been solved, the guilty exposed, and the shadows of Ravenwood dispelled. Yet Hastings sensed that his friend was not yet ready to close the book on this affair. Poirot, Hastings said, breaking the quiet. You've done it again. Unravelled a tangle of lies and motives with those remarkable little grey cells of yours. But I can't help wondering, do you ever feel the case isn't truly over, even after the truth is out? Poirot opened his eyes, a faint smile curving his lips. Mon ami Hastings, you touch upon the essence of my work. The case, it is solved when the truth is revealed, oui, but the ripples of that truth, they continue to spread. The heart of Ravenwood Hall has been laid bare, but its healing, that is a journey only time can complete. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. You mean Cecilia and Edward, or the Langley family as a whole? Poirot's gaze was distant, as if seeing beyond the train's confines. All of them, Hastings. Mademoiselle Cecilia, with her love tested, I must share, for the curtain has not yet fully fallen.
The train rattled over a junction, and Poirot adjusted his position, his voice taking on a contemplative tone. This affair, it was not merely about blackmail or embezzlement, but about the fragility of trust. Monsieur Carver, in his greed, broke the trust of the Langleys. Monsieur Harwood, in his fear, broke the trust of his beloved. Even Mademoiselle Ward, with her silence, strained the trust of her friend. And yet, in the end, it was trust in the power of truth, that allowed us to resolve this mystery. Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the dramatic moments in the drawing room where Poirot had exposed Carver's scheme with surgical precision. That rose petal with Carver's cologne, it was such a small thing, but it clinched everything. How do you always see what we miss? Poirot's smile was warm, but tinged with melancholy. The little grey cells, Hastings. They are trained to seek the anomaly, the detail that does not fit. The petal, the footprint, the tremor in the note's handwriting, these were the whispers of truth, drowned out by the noise of deception. But it is not enough to see, mon ami. One must understand the heart that leaves such clues behind. The train slowed as it approached a small station, its platform illuminated by a single lamp. Poirot glanced out, his expression thoughtful. Consider, Hastings, the role of Jenkins, the butler. A man of loyalty, coerced by Carver's threats, yet he left the vial of theatrical makeup where it could be found. Was it carelessness or a subconscious plea to be caught? The human heart, it betrays itself even in its silence. Hastings frowned, struck by the insight. You think Jenkins wanted to be found out? Not wanted, perhaps, Poirot replied, but needed. His conscience, it could not bear the weight of his complicity. And so he left a clue, as all guilty hearts do. It is the task of Hercule Poirot to find it. The train resumed its journey, the compartment falling into a comfortable silence. Hastings, reflecting on Poirot's words, asked, What do you think will happen to them all now? Will Cecilia and Edward marry? Will Lady Margaret restore the estate? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. The future, Hastings, is not for Poirot to predict, but to ponder. Mademoiselle Cecilia is strong, her love tempered by truth. If Monsieur Harwood can prove his devotion through honesty, they may yet find happiness. Lady Margaret, she is a woman of iron will. The estate will recover, though the wounds of betrayal will linger. As for Mademoiselle Ward, her friendship with Cecilia will mend, for amusement. A hero, perhaps, but only in service to the truth. The real heroes, Hastings, are those who face the shadows of their own making and choose to walk in the light. As the train neared London, its lights visible on the horizon, Hastings felt a sense of closure, yet also a profound respect for Poirot's philosophy. You know, Poirot, he said, I sometimes think you see more than just clues. You see people, their souls, their struggles. Poirot inclined his head, his voice soft. Oui, Hastings. To solve a crime is to understand a soul. The little grey cells, they see the clues, but the heart of Hercule Poirot, it feels the weight of their stories. This is why I continue, why I seek the truth, no matter how hidden. The train pulled into the station, its whistle piercing the night. Poirot and Hastings disembarked, their figures small against the bustling platform. Ravenwood Hall was now a memory, its secrets laid bare by Poirot's relentless logic and compassion. As they stepped into the cool London air, Hastings glanced at his friend, whose serene expression spoke of a mission fulfilled. Another case closed, Poirot, Hastings said, a smile tugging at his lips. What's next? Poirot's eyes twinkled with anticipation. The next mystery, mon ami, is always waiting. The world is full of shadows, but the little grey cells, they are ready to bring light. With that, they walked into the city, the final curtain falling on the affair at Ravenwood Hall, leaving behind a legacy of truth and a promise of new puzzles to come.